The Alhambra had an entire separate life outside Spain in music, literature and the arts. The most successful version was popularized by Washington Irving, the romanticized Alhambra. Irving's Alhambra was an oriental paradise on earth, and it was an instant bestseller which ultimately transformed the Alhambra into an exotic sanctuary for foreign travelers. Following Irving, British travel writers described the Alhambra as a magic place where the visitor could dream of the glorious Moorish past. So in 1845, Richard Ford said to his readers that by moonlight you could hear the old Moorish king going through the Alhambra, through the rooms and lamenting the loss of his home. Painters like David Roberts visually consolidated this romantic image in paintings and prints, which were incredibly lucrative in Britain. This was because he made the Alhambra look even more awe-inspiring than it really is. But the person who brought the Alhambra home to Britain was Owen Jones, the first British architect who studied the Alhambra from a rational perspective. He even made the Alhambra tangible for the British public by building a small version of the Court of the Lions in the new Crystal Palace at Sydenham near London in 1854. And Owen Jones had a huge impact on British architecture. There were Moorish-style interiors, smoking rooms, bathing houses, music halls, usually spaces associated with risque behavior, like the famous Alhambra Theatre in central London, which had to close in 1870 because it had staged a frivolous performance of the can-can, the French dance, which was thought immoral in Victorian Britain. And later on, in the early 20th century, cinemas were built in Alhambra style and named after the Alhambra. I'm thinking here of the Alhambra Cinema in Dunfermline, which was built in 1922. It's a small 3-story building in red brick with an Art Deco interior. Obviously, it has nothing to do with the real Alhambra in Granada, but it's a very good example of how the exotic appeal of the Alhambra became an important marketing ploy in rainy Britain. The Alhambra continues to inspire people today, not least in Britain. Personally, I think that amid all the Islamophobia of today, it's important that we celebrate the Alhambra as an extraordinary showcase of a Muslim culture that made a lasting and positive contribution to European history.
I first came into contact with the Alhambra a little bit through the back door, and I was down here living, working on a thesis on the Taifa kingdoms and living in a Carmen across the street from the Alhambra. I'd spend the whole day sort of translating Arabic poetry, and then by 5 or 6 o'clock our landlady would invite us up onto the terraza to have sherry and look across at the Alhambra, so I would see it from outside. And it kind of began to get to me. I was always a little bit afraid to study it because for specialists in Islamic art, it's kind of like the Sistine Chapel ceiling. It's this big work of art that so many people have written about, and it's a little bit daunting to take it on. But during the last 5 or 6 years, I've been slowly making my way up toward it and working on it, and have been publishing on it. First of all, I guess it's a building that strikes us as unique. It's a building that is incredibly beautiful. It's incredibly inspiring to be inside. But the thing that kind of sticks with me are all the questions that are still not answered. That's what makes it interesting to me. What exactly happened in each of the spaces? What was its purpose? What sort of life went on inside? We know that the Hall of Comares was, of course, a throne room, but there's the big debate about what the Palacio de Leones, what it was. And I find very interesting sort of the debate surrounding the theory of Juan Carlos Rizauza about the possibility of there having been a madrasa or a zawiya, those sorts of functions associated with the Palace of the Lions. I'm particularly interested in the poetry and its function in ceremony and its connections with other sorts of literature that maybe weren't engraved onto the walls but were part of performances. I've also spent quite a bit of time looking at mudéjar visual culture, and I find its relationship to the Alhambra especially interesting and enlightening as a place of exchange, as a place of encounter of courts, of the courts of Castile, the courts of Christian Spain in different languages with a visual language in common. Right now, I'm working on a project that looks forward into the early part of the 16th century that views the Alhambra and other Islamic buildings in Granada as part of a specifically Islamic culture in terms of the Nasrid religiosity, which is something that strangely is, I think, a bit understudied, which is a bit surprising when you think of the Alhambra. And it's a place that I always, when I come to Spain, I always like to go, I always like to revisit, I always like to refresh my visual contact with its ornament, with its patios, with the views from it. And it's a place and a group of ideas, a place, a structure that I'm sure that I will come back to as often as I can for the rest of my life.